speaking on? Uh, who are you to judge me and the life that I live? Yeah, that was released. It was released on the song's called Judge Not, and it was written in 1961. I don't know if you know this. It didn't actually get released until years later on a compilation album. It didn't make it at the time. But what's really interesting is that even though it was written in 1961, it has such a contemporary ring. And I guess that's why the Christian Union picked it as a topic this evening, and I guess that's perhaps why you came along. It is something that we are thinking about and chimes in with how so many of us feel with regards to our lives. Much more recently than Bob Marley, Pharrell Williams, is that how you say it? I've only actually heard this one song, Freedom it's called. First line, you've got to be suspicious of a song. The first line is... first name Free, last name Dom. That's not that inventive. It's fine if you're into Pharrell Williams and that kind of thing. What I found interesting was that a lady called Marissa Fitzgerald, who's a music critic, she reviewed the song and she said this: Freedom is an awesome track with a feel-good vibe and a positive message. The lyrics are uplifting and promote living a happy life without restrictions or limitations. That's what we want, isn't it? A happy life without restrictions or limitations. It's so self-evident that that's what we want that it's almost ridiculous to even begin to talk about it. Why would we even want to discuss that? It's evident to us all, isn't it? We want to be free. We want to be the masters of our souls, the captain of the masters of our fate, the captains of our souls. Some of you left home just in September past, and that's what you've been pursuing, getting away from the restraints of home and parents. Some of you are a bit further into life here at Holloway, and you're working hard because you want to have the freedom to live your life well, and to do that you need to be successful because you need to make money. If you can make that money, you'll be free, no restraints. Some of you have ended relationships because you didn't want to be tied down. You wanted to be free. We love freedom. And of course, this then presents a problem with Christianity, doesn't it? If you know anything about the Christian faith, you'll know that the story of Western culture has been in some ways an effort to win our freedom by escaping the restrictions of religion. And when we hear the things that we hear about the Christian faith, or the claims that Jesus Christ makes, things like, you must be born again if you're going to follow me. I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. That is, you can't get to God any other way but through Jesus. That sounds very exclusive, it sounds very restrictive, and it doesn't seem to fit at all with what we think is right, the way we feel that we should be able to live. They sound restrictive. They are restrictive. And so very strange to our modern ears. Why would anyone want to associate with someone so exclusive? Well, I want to suggest why this evening. And to do that, I want to do two things. On the one hand, I want to press into this cultural narrative a little bit, that we should be free to live without restrictions. And at the same time, I want to look at Jesus Christ. See, if we're really committed to this vision of freedom, we need to re-examine our unexamined assumptions. The fact that it's self-evident to us means that we don't ask questions about it, we don't critique it, we don't push into it. And that's what I want to do this evening. Re-examine our unexamined assumptions. I should be free to do whatever I want without restrictions or limitations. I want to suggest is problematic for two reasons. Number one, it doesn't work. As much as we want to cheer the slogan, what happens when our freedoms, when our wants contradict each other? So, I want to be fit and healthy, and I want to eat fish and chips and burgers and lie on the sofa. Many of you guys are young enough to still be able to do both those things. When you get to my age, you can't do both those things. Those are two competing wants. A man wants to be free to sleep with every beautiful woman he sees, and he wants his wife to love and respect him, and he wants to be able to live in the same house as his children. He can't have freedom in both areas, can he? And no one would think it strange if his wife told him to get out and never come back. It'd be remarkable if she didn't say that, and everyone would think it was strange if he then came back to her when she said, get out, you can't treat me like that, and he said, who are you to judge my life and the way that I live? Can you see it doesn't work? There isn't one thing called freedom, this sort of amorphous thing that everybody agrees what it is, and we can point to it and we can say that's freedom, and we either have it or we don't have it. But to choose one option in life, to go one way, necessarily means that we have to forego another way. We can't avoid restricting ourselves. As soon as we make a choice between one option and another, we're choosing to go one way, we're restricting ourselves from having that other thing. And that's not a bad thing. We don't look at an athlete who makes the sacrifices that they do in order to succeed, an athlete who surrenders control, as it were, of their life to a coach, and think that they've made a bad decision. We would think there was something amiss if we read a headline on the back of the paper tomorrow that says, Usain Bolt sacks his coach for judging his life. No, he wants his coach to tell him what to do and what not to do. So I want to suggest that the question isn't, how can I live to do whatever I want, life without restrictions and limitations, but rather, how can I know which freedom is the best? Which freedom do I choose that will be the most liberating option? Or to look at it negatively, it is to say constraints are unavoidable. By going one way, we're constraining ourselves from something else, restraining ourselves from something else. We need to choose the constraints that will lead to our flourishing. First problem is it doesn't work. Second problem I want to suggest is that it is a destructive way to think about life. See, one of the qualifiers that's often made when we talk about being free to live as we please is to say, I want to be free to live as I please, and I should be able to do that as long as it doesn't harm anyone else. And that sounds very plausible initially, but I want to suggest that it's unavoidable. You can't live without restrictions or limitations and avoid harming either yourself or anyone else. In fact, I want to say that living as you wish damages individuals, it damages relationships, and it damages communities. Now, firstly, there's a problem with this idea of harm. I want to do it as long as it doesn't harm anyone else, because it presupposes that we all agree on what harm is, which of course we don't. One man's use of pornography, and that's none of your business, is what I do in my own time, he might say, is another man's exploitation of women and corrosion of his ability to form healthy relationships. One of them thinks it's perfectly okay, the other thinks it's harm. But the damage is also felt, and this I think is interesting, it's also felt when we get some of this freedom that we say we desire. In his novel titled Freedom, Jonathan Franzen has a character called Patty Berglund. Her life begins to unravel, and one of the things she does to try and get sort of as therapy, she decides to write an autobiography. I think if my life was unraveling, I would not want to write an autobiography. But anyway, that's what she does in the novel. And the narrator comments and says this, where did the self-pity come from? By almost any standard, she had led a luxurious life. She had all day, every day, to figure out some decent and satisfying way to live. And yet all she ever seemed to get for all her choices and all her freedom was more miserable. The autobiographer is almost forced to the conclusion that she pitied herself for being so free. Being able to live how she pleased didn't lead to the real freedom she desired. It led to misery. Too many choices, too many options. She didn't know where to go and what to do, and she was paralyzed and miserable. It damages us as individuals. Secondly, it damages relationships. Now, a particularly striking, obvious example of this is seen in the film Calvary. I don't know if you've seen it, starring Brendan Gleeson. Brendan Gleeson, the Irish actor, is a man who has gone into the priesthood later in life. His wife had died, and he decided to go into the priesthood, and he had a daughter. A friend of mine gave me the DVD of this. Quite a dark film, very interesting, but quite dark. He gave me the film, the DVD, a man in my congregation, and he said, you'll like this. It's about a guy whose church turned on him and burned down the church building. Great. Anyway, Gleeson is this priest character, and he goes, and when we first meet him talking to his daughter, it's clear that she has attempted suicide. And they're talking about her and talking about her life and so on, and he's trying to sort of be compassionate and understanding and so on. And at one point she says to him, look, I belong to myself, not to anyone else. And Gleason, the Gleason character, Father Lavelle, he replies, true, and then there's a long pause, and then he says, false. And he's highlighting the fact that her actions, her saying she belongs to herself and she can take her own life if she wishes, he's highlighting the fact that her actions have an effect on others. See, leave me to do what I want. Don't judge my life. Leave me to do whatever I want. I should be able to live without restrictions or constraints. Presumes that we're autonomous beings. Presumes that we live completely independently and that we need no one and we owe no one anything. But that's just not the case. All of us are connected to other people. The human race is unavoidably interconnected. Parents, friends, and others. And you could go through the list. Teachers, coaches, people whose lives intermesh with ours. And our behavior, whatever it is, always has an effect on them. And then, of course, thirdly, the knock-on effect of that in society in general. The more we pursue our own desires, the more we do that at the expense of others, we actually undermine the social structures of family, of neighborhood, and of community as a whole. So, when this narrative is put under a bit of scrutiny, I think you can see that problems emerge. Now, you might disagree, you can push back, you can ask me questions in a minute or two. But I want to say that our quest for freedom along these lines, don't you judge me, I am free to live however I want, actually ends up leaving us stuck. Now, Jesus addresses this issue in John's Gospel, in John chapter 8. Those books that say uncover on them are a copy of John's Gospel. If you've never read it, I would encourage you to take it away with you. Those are for you if you want. I'm going to read a few verses, though, from John chapter 8. Jesus says this to a group of people who are kind of following him around and scrutinizing him. And he says, if you abide in me, and if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. They answered him, we are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you can say you will become free? Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, anyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever, the Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. See, Jesus puts his finger on our problem with freedom when he says everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. Now, it's not popular to talk about this, I know that, but it does get to the heart of the problem. See, sin is not just breaking some impersonal rule. Sin is choosing something other than God at the center of your life. And Jesus is saying, if you make anything other than him the center of your life, it will enslave you. It won't set you free, it will positively enslave you. If you choose to live how you please, it will tie you down and it will diminish your humanity. And here's the thing, because of the nature of the human heart, the thing that will enslave you could be absolutely anything. The author and university lecturer David Foster Wallace, he wasn't a Christian, but he made this striking observation at what has become probably one of his most famous pieces of work. He died a few years ago. He took his own life, actually. But he made this observation. It was at Kenyon College, and he was giving a commencement address back in 2005. He said, there's no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type of thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap your real meaning in life, then you'll never have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you'll always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. He's saying whatever you make the center of your life is what you worship, and we choose to worship things that ultimately will enslave us. And this is what Jesus means when he says we're slaves to sin. And yet it's into this context that he then says that he can offer freedom, real freedom. Do you see, did you hear when I said in verse 31 of chapter 8, he says, the truth will set you free. That is, he's saying, if you really know who you are in relation to him, And if you know where you belong in relation to Him, then you will have liberty. He's saying, if you hold to my teaching, that is, if I'm the only thing that is sufficient for you and the only thing that is truly satisfying for you, which is the heart of the promise of the Christian faith, Jesus Christ is held out to us in the Christian faith as the one who alone is sufficient and fully satisfying for us. And he's saying, if we see Him in that way, then we will have real, true, and deep liberty. We all know, don't we, that the freest place that we can be is in a relationship with someone who loves us and accepts us, even despite our faults. They know us as we are, and they love us and accept us, even with all our faults. There's nothing more restricting than loneliness, wanting to find love but being unable to. Yet to be in a relationship, as we saw earlier, as I said earlier, it means that we have to restrict ourselves. To choose this relationship means we're not choosing this relationship. And when we choose any relationship, we're choosing to restrict ourselves by no longer getting to live on our own terms, but by having to share and to put ourselves out and to serve another person. And when it comes to considering a relationship, the question that we always ask is, will the constraints of this relationship, will choosing this relationship be liberating? And in the end, it always boils down to trust. Can I trust this person? Can I trust them that they will love me and accept me even when they see my faults? And it's the same with Jesus Christ. The question you need to ask, the question you need to resolve in your minds is, can you trust Jesus enough to be in a relationship with Him? And I want to suggest to you that you can, for one big reason. And the big reason is this: He restricted Himself for you. In coming to earth, Jesus gave up glory and embraced the constraints of humanity. But more than that, the story in John 8 unfolds all the way to the end of John's Gospel, where you see Jesus submitting to the arrest of the religious authorities, where you see Him submitting to being chained and nailed to a piece of wood. He who had ultimate freedom put Himself under the ultimate constraints, and He did it so that you could be free. Jesus died. Jesus was judged so that you could have life. Life that is truly life. Liberty that is truly free. And He rose again to assure you that the life that He offers is like no other. And when you see Him do that, when you see what Jesus did for you, you can feel the freedom of the relationship with Him. So can you see, when as Christians we call people to put their faith in Jesus, it's not to judge them. No one is judging you by asking you to follow Jesus Christ, but rather offering you hope, offering you liberty. Jesus says, if you know the truth, if you know that the most important thing in your life is a relationship with Him, and you make that the most significant thing in your life and in your imagination and in your being, then you've got a freedom. Well, you've got freedom in everything, because a relationship with Jesus is something that nothing then can take away from you. Christianity is the only religion that claims God gave up His freedom so that we could experience ultimate freedom, the freedom from death. And when you embrace the constraints of this relationship, you'll discover that they are the most liberating constraints of all, because this is true. And ask any Christian that you know, when the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I want to encourage you to respond to that. I want to encourage you to think it through. If you've got questions, are we going to do questions now? Yes? Questions, you've got a few minutes. Why not write down questions on a piece of paper, take them in. If you want to ask questions from the floor, we can do that as well. But it may be that you're not interested. You think, okay, let's get back to the quiz. If that's the case, let me encourage you, if you are going to reject Jesus, to reject the real Jesus. So don't reject a caricature as lots of people do. Take one of the Uncover John's Gospels away, read it through for yourself, read it with somebody else from the Christian Union. But also, make sure that you get your questions answered. Don't leave your questions hanging. Make sure that you get them answered. We'll try and have a go at that now, but you'll be able to do it as well through the people that you know from the Christian Union. Hand back to the guys.